Some secrets aren't hidden because they're priceless. They're hidden because remembering them is the only way someone survives. Before anyone inside the Castellano estate realized something extraordinary was about to unfold, the answer had been hanging quietly around Naomi Carter's neck every single day. The silver necklace never sparkled beneath the crystal chandeliers that filled the mansion with warm golden light. It never matched the elegant black uniform she wore while polishing imported marble floors or dusting antique shelves worth more than the apartment she rented across town. It was too old, too scratched, and too ordinary for a woman surrounded by unimaginable wealth. Yet she never took it off. Dominic Castellano noticed details the way other men noticed headlines. Years of running a powerful business empire had taught him that people always revealed themselves through habits they didn't know they repeated. Some employees checked their phones every few minutes. Others straightened paintings that weren't crooked or adjusted expensive watches whenever they became nervous. Naomi did only one thing. Whenever someone walked too close to her, her fingers drifted toward the tiny silver pendant resting just beneath her collarbone. She never looked down at it. She simply touched it, almost as if confirming it was still there before continuing with her work. It happened so naturally that no one else seemed to notice. But Dominic did. He first saw it on a rainy Tuesday morning as she carried fresh coffee into his library. The sleeve of her uniform shifted slightly, revealing the thin chain against her dark skin. Her fingertips brushed the pendant for less than a second before she quietly placed the coffee on his desk. "Thank you, Mr. Castellano," she said with her usual calm smile before disappearing as silently as she had entered. Later that afternoon, he caught the same movement again while she arranged fresh flowers in the grand foyer. That evening, security footage from the entrance hall showed her instinctively protecting the necklace when another employee accidentally bumped into her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't vanity. It was something deeper, something almost sacred. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern never changed. Naomi accepted every difficult assignment without complaint. She stayed late when others wanted to leave. She volunteered to help elderly staff members carry heavy supply boxes across the enormous estate, refusing assistance even when exhaustion showed beneath her gentle eyes. Yet through every task, through every ordinary moment, the necklace remained exactly where it had always been. Dominic could have replaced it with a diamond worth hundreds of thousands of dollars before breakfast, but somehow he knew she would never accept such an offer. During the Castellano Foundation's annual charity gala, hundreds of distinguished guests filled the ballroom dressed in custom tuxedos and designer gowns. Crystal glasses reflected soft candlelight, while a string quartet played timeless classics beneath ceilings painted generations before Dominic had been born. Naomi moved quietly between guests, ensuring every detail remained perfect without drawing attention to herself. Then, just as she leaned forward to refill an elderly guest's water glass, the pendant slipped from beneath her collar. The old gentleman froze. His smile disappeared. His trembling eyes locked onto the tiny silver necklace as though he had seen a ghost. For several long seconds, he forgot the crowded ballroom surrounding him. In a barely audible whisper, he breathed a single word. "Impossible." Across the room, Dominic heard him. And for the first time since Naomi had entered his life, the simple necklace no longer looked ordinary at all. Dominic did not interrupt the reception, but the elderly guest's reaction stayed with him long after the final limousine disappeared through the mansion gates. He had spent years negotiating with influential people, and he knew the difference between surprise and recognition. The old man's face had not reflected curiosity. It had reflected memory. The following morning, the estate awakened beneath a pale autumn sunrise that painted the stone walls with soft amber light. Housekeepers rolled supply carts through polished hallways while gardeners trimmed hedges still sparkling with dew. Naomi Carter began her routine exactly as she always did, arriving 15 minutes before every other employee, tying her apron neatly, greeting each co-worker with the same gentle smile, and quietly beginning the work no one else noticed until it was finished. Dominic watched from the second-floor balcony without announcing himself. She carried fresh linens with practiced ease, stopped to help an elderly cook lift a heavy stockpot onto the counter, then crouched beside a frightened stray kitten that had wandered into the greenhouse, softly coaxing it towards safety before returning to her duties as though the interruption had never happened. Through every movement, The silver pendant remained hidden beneath the collar of her uniform until one instinctive motion revealed it again. Her fingertips brushed the necklace for only an instant after another employee accidentally reached too close while passing a stack of folded towels. It was almost invisible unless someone was searching for it. Dominic realized he had begun searching. Later that afternoon, he found Sophia Reynolds, the estate manager, reviewing schedules in her office. She had supervised household staff for nearly 20 years and knew every employee better than their personnel files ever could. "How long has Naomi worked here?" Dominic asked. Sophia looked up with mild surprise. "Almost 18 months, sir." "Has she ever removed that necklace?" Sophia thought for a moment before slowly shaking her head. "Not once. I remember because uniform inspections require jewelry to be minimal. I almost asked her to remove it during her first week, but the way she held it." Sophia paused, searching for the right words. "It was as though I had asked her to hand over part of her family. I decided one small necklace was not worth making her uncomfortable." Dominic nodded but said nothing. The answer only deepened the mystery. That evening, Naomi finished cleaning the east wing after everyone else had left. She believed the mansion had grown quiet, yet she still moved with the same care she showed during the busiest hours of the day. As she dusted framed photographs lining the library shelves, the pendant slipped into the light. Again, this time she opened it for only a heartbeat. Dominic, standing unnoticed in the shadow of the doorway, could not see what rested inside. He saw only the immediate change in her expression. Her shoulders relaxed. The weariness disappeared from her face. A peaceful smile, small but unmistakably genuine, softened her eyes before she gently closed the tiny locket and whispered, "I kept my promise." She believed no one had heard those words. Dominic remained perfectly still until she quietly left the room. The library fell silent except for the faint crackling of the fireplace. He walked to the exact place where she had been standing only moments earlier. There was nothing unusual on the polished floor, nothing hidden among the bookshelves, and nothing to explain why a simple silver necklace carried enough meaning to brighten a woman who owned almost nothing else. For the first time in many years, Dominic discovered that unanswered questions could weigh far more heavily than answers. The unanswered questions followed Dominic through every meeting, every phone call, and every quiet dinner in the vast estate. He had built his reputation by uncovering facts hidden beneath appearances, yet Naomi's necklace refused to fit any logical explanation. It was not expensive enough to attract collectors, nor elegant enough to carry sentimental value for someone who could have replaced it countless times. Still, something about the elderly guest's whispered reaction and Naomi's quiet promise refused to leave his mind. 2 days later, Dominic drove into downtown Chicago for a series of business appointments. As his car passed through one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, he noticed a narrow jewelry shop tucked between a family bakery and a bookstore that had clearly stood there for decades. Its weathered sign simply read Whitmore Jewelry Restoration. On impulse, he stepped inside. The small shop smelled of polished wood and silver cleaner. Glass display cases held vintage watches, repaired lockets, and heirlooms that families had treasured for generations. Behind the counter stood Arthur Whitmore, an elderly craftsman whose steady hands revealed a lifetime spent restoring memories instead of selling luxury. Dominic described the necklace from memory with surprising precision. Thin silver chain, oval pendant, small engraved border, worn clasp. Arthur listened carefully without interrupting. When Dominic finished, the old jeweler frowned thoughtfully. "That design is unusual," he said. "Not because it is valuable, because almost nobody makes them anymore." Dominic leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Arthur opened an old catalog from beneath the counter and carefully turned several yellowed pages until he stopped at a faded photograph. These lockets were often custom ordered by working families many years ago. The silver itself was never worth much. What mattered was what families placed inside them. A photograph, a handwritten prayer, a child's drawing, sometimes even a pressed flower. Dominic looked at the picture. The shape matched almost perfectly. "Can you estimate its price?" Arthur smiled gently before closing the catalog. Its market value would barely pay for dinner at a nice restaurant. But if someone has carried it every day for decades, then asking about its price would be like asking what a mother's wedding ring is worth after she is gone. Some objects stop being jewelry. They become memory. Dominic thanked him and quietly left the shop carrying nothing except those final words. That evening he returned to the estate just before sunset. Golden light stretched across the gardens as Naomi carefully watered late autumn roses planted near a stone fountain. She moved slowly, humming a melody so soft that the breeze nearly carried it away before anyone else could hear. Again her fingers rested briefly against the pendant beneath her uniform. Dominic almost walked over to ask the question that had occupied his thoughts for days, but something stopped him. For the first time he understood that some answers were not earned through authority. They were given only when trust had grown strong enough to carry them. As he turned toward the house, one of the younger gardeners hurried across the lawn looking embarrassed. "Miss Carter," he called, holding out a folded cleaning cloth. "You dropped this." Naomi accepted it with grateful eyes, but as she unfolded the fabric, her peaceful expression vanished. Her hand searched desperately across the empty folds before instinctively reaching for her neck. The chain was still there. The pendant was gone. Naomi stood perfectly still as though the world itself had forgotten how to move. Her fingers searched the empty chain again and again, refusing to believe what they already knew. The tiny clasp remained fastened around her neck, but the oval pendant that had rested against her heart every day for years had disappeared without a sound. She dropped to her knees beside the stone path, carefully running her hands across the damp grass as the fading sunlight stretched long shadows through the gardens. The young gardener immediately knelt beside her, apologizing over and over even though he had done nothing wrong. Within moments, several members of the household staff joined the search, each quietly combing the flower beds and walkways without asking questions. They had never seen Naomi look frightened before. Dominic watched the scene from several yards away before walking forward. His calm voice carried across the garden. "Nobody leaves until we search every inch of these grounds." No one argued. Flashlights appeared as evening settled over the estate. Security officers checked pathways, maintenance workers inspected drainage grates, and gardeners carefully lifted every fallen leaf that the cool October breeze had scattered across the property. Naomi thanked every person who tried to help, but her voice grew softer with each passing minute. She was not crying. Somehow that made the silence even heavier. Nearly an hour later, one of the security supervisors approached Dominic holding something wrapped inside a clean handkerchief. "Sir," he said quietly, "we found this beneath the bench near the fountain." Dominic unfolded the cloth with surprising care. Resting inside was the missing pendant. Its silver surface was scratched from years of faithful use, and one small hinge had finally given way. The locket had opened slightly during the fall, but whatever rested inside remained protected. Dominic looked toward Naomi. Relief washed across her face so suddenly that her knees almost gave way. She hurried over, stopping only when she realized the pendant was in his hands. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Dominic gently extended the handkerchief toward her. Instead of immediately taking it, Naomi whispered, "May I ask one favor?" He nodded. "Please, do not open it." Her words carried no fear, only quiet hope. Dominic looked at the tiny opening where the damaged hinge had separated. One small movement would reveal everything hidden inside. Every instinct that had helped him uncover countless secrets urged him to look. Yet he remembered Arthur Whitmore's words. Some objects stopped being jewelry. They became memory. Without hesitation, he folded the cloth over the pendant again, shielding it completely from view before placing it carefully into Naomi's waiting hands. She closed both palms around it, as though protecting something far greater than silver. Her eyes shimmered beneath the garden lights. "Thank you," she said so softly that only Dominic could hear. "You trusted me," he replied. Naomi lowered her eyes before answering. Some promises only stay alive because someone chooses not to ask the next question. Dominic offered to have the pendant repaired by the finest jewelers in Chicago, but Naomi politely declined. "There is only one person who has ever repaired it," she explained with a faint smile. "He is retired now. I only hope he is still alive." Dominic did not press her for another explanation. Instead, he quietly instructed his driver to cancel his remaining appointments the next morning. For reasons he could not fully explain, finding the retired craftsman who had cared for that little silver locket suddenly felt more important than any meeting waiting on his calendar. The next morning, the city was wrapped in a blanket of pale gray clouds as Dominic's driver guided the black sedan through neighborhoods that had long since surrendered their luxury storefronts to family businesses that had survived generation after generation. Naomi sat quietly in the back seat, the repaired chain resting in her palm, while the damaged pendant remained carefully wrapped inside the same white handkerchief Dominic had used the night before. She had offered several times to make the trip alone, but he had refused with calm determination. If someone protected your memories for this many years, he had said before they left the estate, then I would like to thank that person myself. Nearly an hour later, the car stopped in front of a narrow brick building with faded blue shutters and a weathered wooden sign that simply read Bennett Watch and Jewelry Repair. The display window held only a handful of vintage clocks, silver brooches, and pocket watches that looked untouched by modern fashion. Naomi smiled for the first time since losing the pendant in the garden. "This is the place," she whispered. A tiny brass bell chimed as they stepped inside. The shop smelled of cedar wood, machine oil, and polished silver. Behind an old workbench sat an elderly man with kind eyes magnified by thick glasses. His hands paused above a tiny wristwatch the moment he looked up. For several silent seconds, he stared at Naomi before his face softened into a smile filled with recognition. "Well," he said warmly, "I wondered when you would come back." Naomi crossed the room and gently placed the wrapped pendant on the counter. The hinge finally gave out. "Mr. Bennett." The old craftsman carefully unfolded the cloth. His expression became unexpectedly tender as he lifted the worn locket into the light. "It lasted longer than I expected," he murmured. "Your father always said nothing built with love truly breaks. It simply asks for patient hands." Dominic remained silent, but hearing those words sent a quiet chill through him. Mr. Bennett opened a small drawer beneath his bench and removed a faded notebook filled with handwritten repair records dating back decades. He slowly turned the fragile pages until he stopped on an entry written in blue ink. Smiling gently, he slid the notebook toward Naomi. "I kept my promise," he said. Dominic glanced at the page without meaning to read it, but one sentence immediately caught his eye. It simply said, "Never replace what carries a father's promise. Repair only. Preserve always." Naomi traced the words with her fingertips before quietly nodding. He remembered. Mr. Bennett looked toward Dominic for the first time. "You must be the gentleman who brought her here." Dominic introduced himself, expecting surprise after giving his name. Instead, the elderly jeweler merely smiled. "Money can purchase beautiful jewelry," he said softly, "but it has never been able to create an heirloom. That takes sacrifice." As he carefully examined the broken hinge through a magnifying lens, his smile slowly faded. "There is one thing you both should know," he said after a thoughtful silence. "This locket was never meant to stay closed forever. Your father asked me to repair it whenever necessary, but he also made me promise that one day, when the right person stood beside you, the truth inside would finally be seen." Naomi's eyes widened in stunned disbelief. She slowly shook her head. "He never told me that." Mr. Bennett looked down at the tiny silver locket resting beneath his careful hands and answered with quiet certainty. "That is because he knew the promise was never his to reveal. It was yours to discover when the time was right." The little workshop became so quiet that even the steady ticking of dozens of old clocks seemed unusually loud. Naomi stared at the worn silver locket resting in Mr. Bennett's careful hands, unable to reconcile his words with everything she believed she knew about her father. She had always been told that the necklace was simply the last gift he had given her before his sudden passing many years earlier. He had hugged her, fastened the chain around her neck with gentle hands, and whispered only one request: "Never let this leave your heart." She had honored that promise every single day since then without ever asking why. Mr. Bennett reached beneath his workbench and slowly removed a small cedar box whose polished corners had faded with age. He unlocked it with an old brass key hanging from a chain around his wrist and carefully lifted out a sealed envelope. Naomi immediately recognized the familiar handwriting across the front. Her breath caught before she even touched it. The elegant letters spelled only her name, Naomi Carter, nothing else. Her hands trembled as she looked toward the elderly craftsman. "You kept this all these years?" she asked softly. Mr. Bennett nodded. "Your father came here 3 weeks before he passed away. He repaired the hinge himself under my supervision because he wanted to learn how. Before he left, he handed me this envelope and asked me to keep it safe until the day you arrived with someone who had already proven they respected your memories before demanding your secrets. Naomi slowly turned toward Dominic. Neither of them spoke. They both remembered the moment in the garden when he could have opened the damaged pendant but chose not to. Mr. Bennett smiled gently. Some people earn trust by asking questions. Others earn it by refusing to ask them. Naomi carefully broke the seal. Inside rested a single folded letter and a faded photograph no larger than a postage stamp. She unfolded the photograph first. It showed her as a little girl sitting on her father's shoulders during a neighborhood summer parade, both of them laughing beneath bright American flags fluttering in the warm breeze. Tears quietly gathered in her eyes before she unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with time, but every word remained perfectly clear. My sweet Naomi, it began. If you are reading this, then life has already taught you that love cannot protect us from every goodbye. I cannot choose how long I remain beside you, but I can choose what remains beside you after I am gone. This necklace is not valuable because of the silver. It is valuable because every time you reach for it, I hope you remember the person you promised to become. Kind when kindness is difficult. Honest when honesty has a cost. Gentle when the world rewards anger. If one day someone protects this necklace without demanding to know what is inside, you may trust that person with your heart, because respect always arrives before understanding. Naomi could no longer hold back the quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks. Dominic lowered his eyes, giving her the privacy to absorb every word. He had expected a hidden fortune, a mysterious map, or a long-buried family secret. Instead, he found something infinitely rarer. A father's unwavering faith that character would recognize character across the years. And in that tiny workshop filled with clocks measuring the passage of time, Dominic began to understand that the greatest inheritance any parent could leave behind was not wealth, but the courage to keep a promise long after the voice that made it had fallen silent. The drive back to the Castellano estate passed in complete silence, yet it was not an uncomfortable silence. Naomi held the repaired locket in both hands, as though she were carrying something far more delicate than silver. Every few miles she unfolded her father's letter again, reading the familiar words more slowly each time, allowing every sentence to settle deeper into her heart. Dominic never interrupted. He simply watched the autumn landscape pass beyond the window, realizing that for the first time in years his thoughts were not occupied by business decisions or future negotiations. They were occupied by a father he had never met and the extraordinary wisdom he had quietly entrusted to a little silver pendant. When they arrived at the estate, the afternoon sun cast long golden beams across the front steps. Several employees greeted Naomi with relieved smiles after hearing the necklace had been repaired. She thanked each of them sincerely before returning to her duties without asking for additional time off. That simple decision affected Dominic more than he expected. Most people, after such an emotional morning, would have sought solitude. Naomi instead chose responsibility. She believed promises extended beyond family memories. They included showing up for others even when her own heart felt full. Over the following days, Dominic noticed changes that no one else seemed to recognize. The necklace itself had not changed. It still looked modest against her simple black uniform. Yet the way he saw it had transformed completely. Every time Naomi gently touched the pendant, he no longer imagined hidden treasure or unanswered mysteries. He imagined a little girl carrying her father's voice through every difficult season of her life. He noticed how she quietly encouraged the newest housekeeper after an embarrassing mistake, reminding her that every expert had once been a beginner. He watched her leave homemade soup outside the apartment of an elderly groundskeeper recovering from surgery without signing her name. He saw her stay late helping the kitchen staff prepare meals for a local shelter funded by the Castellano Foundation, smiling as though serving others required no recognition at all. None of those moments were performed for praise. Most happened when she believed no one was watching. One evening, Dominic called Sophia Reynolds into his study. She expected another discussion about budgets or staffing schedules. Instead, he asked a question that surprised them both. Has Naomi always been like this? Sophia smiled knowingly. Every single day? She simply assumes kindness is part of the job description. Dominic slowly nodded. And nobody ever told me. Sophia answered gently. Because she never wanted anyone to. She once asked me not to mention the extra things she does. She said if people thanked her, she might begin expecting gratitude instead of doing the right thing. After Sophia left, Dominic stood beside the tall library windows watching the lights come alive across the estate. The words from the letter echoed quietly inside him. Respect always arrives before understanding. For years he had judged loyalty through contracts, experience, and careful observation. Naomi's father had measured it differently. He believed character revealed itself through small decisions made when no reward was waiting. Dominic finally understood why the elderly gentleman at the charity gala had whispered the word impossible upon seeing the necklace. He had not been reacting to the silver. He had been reacting to the rare possibility that someone in the modern world had actually kept such a promise alive. As the evening settled peacefully over the mansion, Dominic made a quiet decision of his own. He would never again see Naomi Carter as merely an employee working beneath his roof. From that day forward, he would see her exactly as her father had hoped the right person someday would. As someone whose greatest wealth had always been the values she carried close to her heart. The following Saturday morning, the Castellano estate welcomed dozens of guests for the annual Community Appreciation Brunch, an event Dominic had once considered little more than another obligation on an already crowded calendar. Local teachers, firefighters, librarians, veterans, and longtime neighborhood volunteers filled the sunlit ballroom with warm conversations instead of formal speeches. Naomi arrived before sunrise to help prepare the dining room, carefully arranging fresh flowers and polished silverware with the same quiet attention she gave every ordinary day. The repaired locket rested once again against her heart, hidden beneath the collar of her uniform where only she knew it was there. As the morning unfolded, Dominic found himself watching the guests more carefully than ever before. He noticed something he had overlooked for years. Naomi somehow remembered every person's name. She asked one retired school principal about his granddaughter's first semester in college. She congratulated a volunteer firefighter on his recent retirement. She reminded an elderly widow to take home the sugar-free dessert prepared especially for her dietary needs. None of those details appeared in any event schedule. They lived only inside Naomi's remarkable memory and generous heart. Near the end of the gathering, Dominic stepped onto the small platform where he usually offered brief, closing remarks before thanking everyone for attending. This time he paused much longer than expected. The room gradually became silent. Instead of beginning with prepared notes, he looked toward Naomi, who was quietly collecting empty coffee cups near the back of the ballroom, completely unaware that every eye was about to turn in her direction. Today, Dominic began calmly. I was reminded that the greatest examples of leadership are rarely found behind large desks or expensive titles. Sometimes they are found in the quiet people who choose kindness when nobody is paying attention. Naomi looked up with visible surprise, immediately assuming he must be speaking about someone else. Dominic continued. There is a member of this household who has spent months serving every guest, encouraging every co-worker, and helping this community without ever asking for recognition. I only understood the depth of that character because I recently learned that the values guiding those choices were passed down through a father's love rather than through wealth. The ballroom remained completely still. Dominic walked down from the platform and stopped a respectful distance from Naomi. Miss Carter, he said gently, would you please join me? Naomi hesitated before slowly walking forward, her cheeks warming with quiet embarrassment. She had never enjoyed standing at the center of attention. Dominic smiled reassuringly. I am not asking you to speak, he said softly enough that only those nearest could hear. I simply want people to see what true dignity looks like. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. Several guests exchanged curious glances, expecting an expensive piece of jewelry. Dominic opened the box to reveal not diamonds or gold, but a handcrafted walnut display stand with a small brass plaque engraved with a simple sentence. It read, "The greatest treasures are the promises we choose to keep. This belongs wherever you decide," Dominic said. At home, beside your father's letter, or nowhere at all. It is not meant to replace what you already carry. Nothing could. Naomi looked at the wooden stand, then instinctively touched the little silver locket beneath her collar. Tears filled her eyes once more, but this time they carried gratitude instead of grief. She accepted the gift with both hands, understanding that Dominic had honored the one request her father had written all those years ago. He had chosen respect before understanding, and in doing so, he had preserved something far more valuable than a family heirloom. He had preserved the meaning behind it. Several weeks passed, yet something subtle had changed inside the Castellano estate. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight. The grand staircase still echoed with quiet footsteps before dawn. Fresh flowers still appeared in crystal vases before the first guests arrived. Outwardly, everything remained exactly as it had always been. But the people who worked there noticed that Dominic now greeted every employee by name. He paused to thank the groundskeepers after heavy rainstorms, asked the kitchen staff about their families, and listened instead of simply giving instructions. No announcement had been made. No policy had been rewritten. Respect had quietly become part of the atmosphere. Naomi noticed the change as well, although she never claimed credit for it. She continued arriving early, completing every task with the same humility that had guided her from the beginning. The little silver locket remained hidden beneath her collar, resting exactly where her father had placed it years before. Sometimes, during quiet moments before the estate awakened, she would touch it gently and smile, remembering that promises did not grow weaker with time. They became stronger each time they were honored. One crisp December afternoon, Dominic received an unexpected visitor. It was the same elderly gentleman who had whispered the word impossible during the charity gala. After exchanging greetings, the man glanced toward Naomi, who was decorating a Christmas tree in the entrance hall with several children from a local community center. Their laughter filled the mansion with a warmth no expensive decoration could ever create. The elderly guest smiled softly. "Now I understand," he said. Dominic looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Understand what?" The gentleman folded his gloves before answering. "When I saw that necklace, I thought its story had been forgotten. I was wrong. It survived because someone chose to live by the values it represented instead of simply wearing it." Dominic followed the man's gaze toward Naomi. One little girl reached for an ornament hanging too high on the tree, and Naomi gently lifted her so she could place it on the highest branch herself. The child's proud smile illuminated the room far brighter than the sparkling lights. Dominic realized that the true inheritance left by Naomi's father had never been locked inside a silver pendant. It had been carried forward through every generous decision his daughter made when no one expected anything from her. Before leaving, the elderly guest paused beside Dominic one final time. "Many people spend their entire lives searching for treasure," he said quietly. "Very few recognize it when it is standing beside them every ordinary day." That evening, after the guests had gone home and the estate settled into peaceful silence, Naomi walked through the entrance hall one last time before ending her shift. She paused beneath the glowing Christmas tree, touched the little locket resting over her heart, and whispered the same words she had spoken years before. "I kept my promise." This time another voice answered from across the hall. "And your father kept his." Naomi turned to find Dominic standing near the front doors, his expression calm and sincere. Neither of them needed to say anything else. The silence between them carried understanding that words could never improve. Outside, soft snow began falling across the quiet estate, covering every path in a blanket of white as the lights inside continued to glow with gentle warmth. Some stories end with fortunes discovered or mysteries solved. This one ended with something far rarer. A father whose love outlived time, a daughter who never let that love fade, and a man who finally learned that the greatest treasures are never measured by what they are worth, but by the lives they quietly transform. And that day, everyone who witnessed their story remembered what true dignity looks like.